So reason has become one of the primary principles of this faith. And a second core principle is freedom. Ours is a faith that teaches that freedom is essential to the discovery of truth. Freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of debate and doubt and inquiry. Our forebears saw that the Spirit of God, or the greatest good that we could possibly know, is alive in the world in those movements of freedom in human history. Their inspiration came originally from the Bible story of the Exodus, in which God helps Moses lead the Jews out of slavery. God, the story shows us, is on the side of freedom. With the Exodus story as a model, our forebears came to see that the unfolding of freedom in history is a sacred event. Now we can ask, where was God, or the good, in the struggle of first century Christians to freely practice their religion despite Roman persecution? God and goodness were with those who were fighting for their freedom to believe. Where was God when the church was persecuting scientists like Copernicus and Galileo and denying them the freedom to study and teach and learn? God was not in the church's stifling of the study of science. God was, as God always is, on the side of freedom. Where was God? Where was the good during the fight to end slavery in America? And during the fights for civil rights? During the work for workers and women's rights? During the struggle to end apartheid in South Africa? We see God, or the greatest good we can know, in many places, but we always see it in the movements for freedom in human history. Whether it's in Moses, Martin, Malcolm, Mahatma, Milk, or Mandela, we see what we could call the divine in those efforts that lead to greater freedom. Which leads me to the third major mainstay in the liberal tradition of theology: tolerance. Reason, freedom, and tolerance, these three are the primary principles that have guided our church heritage and theology for going on 5 centuries now. Now, tolerance is easy for most of us to accept because most of us have seen its opposite. Many of us have experienced religious intolerance, and we want nothing to do with it. We've seen the conflicts in Ireland and Israel and the Middle East, and sometimes in our own families, when intolerance raises its ugly head, divides people, creates conflict. Yet our commitment to religious tolerance also comes from a positive affirmation. It's an affirmation that we find in the story of the 3 blind men and the elephant. When asked, what is an elephant? The first, having only felt the elephant's leg, says an elephant is like the base of a tree. The second man, feeling only the elephant's trunk, argues, no, my friends, an elephant is not like a tree at all. It's like a fire hose. And the third touches only the elephant's side and tells them they're both crazy because an elephant is like a solid wall. The 3 blind men argue into the night with great consternation and self-righteousness about the truth of an elephant. Our tolerance is born out of an understanding that people who are different from us may know something of great importance about the nature of life and truth and love that we have not even begun to understand. We value tolerance because we believe that people who are different from ourselves have something of great importance to offer us. You may or may not know that in my 20s, I spent 3 years on a mountain bike traveling around the world. I met people of many different regions and religions, cultures and creeds, classes and colors. It became crystal clear to me that God does not play favorites. I saw that people of all faiths could be good, wholesome, and loving, and usually were. And I was treated graciously by people in Turkey, Tokyo, Thailand, Tibet, and Tel Aviv, Korea, Karachi, Calcutta, Canada, Kalamazoo, and Kathmandu, Bangkok, Benares, Budapest, and Bombay, Toledo, Toronto, Tulsa, and Taipei. And my faith in humankind and human kindness was reaffirmed time and time again. And these days, whenever I start to slip into cynicism, or start to lose faith in my fellow human beings, or I start questioning the real value of being in a community with people who are different from me, I just pull out my pictures of that trip. And I look at those people who took me into their homes and huts and caves and tents. The ones whose floors were made of dirt, and the ones who carried jugs of water on their heads, the ones who plowed the ground with oxen, and the ones who had tattoos on their faces, the children who marveled at my funny pale-colored skin, and the old people whose eyes were filled with tears when they heard that I'd come all that way on a bicycle, and explained that they'd never been more than 10 miles from the place where they were born. Looking at these photos helps me get over my self-defeating and self-centered thinking sometimes. And they restore in me a vision of human goodness that transcends differences. And since I've been back in the United States, people have often asked me how I found my way through so many unknown and barely tread places, surrounded by people who didn't look like me and most often didn't even speak the same language. And the answer is quite simple, really. I always had a map. Sometimes the map was no more than something drawn by hand on the back of a napkin by the farmer in the last village I passed through. But I always had a map of some kind to show me the way. And I came to realize that the key to treading unknown paths is having a reliable map. And I also came to realize that having a good map was the key to most success in life. And I came to agree with Dr. Rebecca Parker, who heads up our seminary in California, who said the principles and ideals of reason, freedom, and tolerance that we try to put into practice are not mere abstract ideas or lofty ideals, but are a conceptualization of the sacred land, a map, if you will, drawn by those who themselves have stood in glory. And they pass on to us principles and ideals as clues for the path that we are also invited to follow. With that map, there is a promise that if you travel to this country, you will see great beauty. Those forebearers had faith that their acts of courage and devotion would kindle a fire. Not the fire that may consume all earth, but the fire in whose glory we can see each other's faces more clearly. And they had faith that other people who they would not know, who they could not touch or see or prove, would come along after them and keep that fire burning no matter what. So that the light of reason, freedom, and tolerance will never be put out. So that those of us wandering through the wilderness on our way to the promised land would never become too lost. And so if you ever find yourself wondering whether your life or this church are heading in the right direction, and if it ever feels like the path you're treading is heading into unknown territory, and the way no longer feels clear, do not fear. Just refer to the map.